for you this lesson from Unity of the Keys Spiritual Center. So let's just feel this energy wherever we are of the now moment. Just taking a moment to be fully present. Well, our lesson today, as you have heard, is about the foundation of unity. The foundation of unity, which is based on Myrtle Fillmore's healing. And those of you who are familiar with unity know that Myrtle Fillmore was one of the co-founders of the unity movement. Now, please know that I am borrowing heavily on research completed from the Unity archives by various individuals, including some of my own research. But one of the best books that really delves into Myrtle's life and history is this one by Thomas E. Witherspoon, Myrtle Fillmore, Mother of Unity. It's a great book. Now, Myrtle was born in Pagetown, Ohio in 1845 with the name Mary Carolyn Page. She was the eighth of 9 children. Her father called her Myrtle when she was a little girl, or Myrtle, and the nickname stuck. Now, her family had been early settlers of the town. Their last name was Page, and it's Pagetown. There's an historical marker there for Myrtle, erected in 1977 by the Unity School of Christianity and the Ohio Historical Society. Now, Myrtle's family were members of the Methodist Episcopal Church. And I'll be honest with you, this has always confused me. I grew up as a Methodist, and right next door, across the field, was the Episcopal Church, and they were very different. So is it Methodist? Is it Episcopal? Well, I learned that the Methodist Episcopal Church was the oldest and the largest Methodist denomination in the U.S., and it's the original name of the Methodist Church. So this also helps me better understand the AME churches. They are the African Methodist Episcopal churches, and they were established due to the enforcement of racial discrimination and segregation. So all these churches are Methodist, essentially. So Myrtle's religious training as a child was very, very strict. The family frowned upon most forms of amusement. The children were not allowed to dance. They were not allowed to have such diversions as playing cards. And Myrtle was a very gentle child, and she did not understand, especially, how her loving mother could agree with and enforce the very strict beliefs that she was hearing at the church. And she is quoted as having said, "I marvel that my wonderful mother, who loved so devotedly, could have worshiped a God who punished or who took the lives of his children." And that was what was being taught at the time. So her older sister, Jane, left home because she did not agree with these strict religious beliefs. And Myrtle's beliefs more aligned with her sister Jane, but she was too young to go anywhere. So she chose to keep the peace. And within herself, she adapted a version of God that was loving and kind. She adapted a version that fit with her understanding of what God and God energy is. And I believe this is a very early indication of the rebel that she was to become. Now, Myrtle read everything that she could find, including books that she borrowed from her brothers. So why did she have to borrow books from her brothers? Well, boys and girls were taught very different subjects in school. She would sneak out to the barn and read and study about specialized sciences and natural philosophy and advanced mathematics and classical studies. These were not taught to girls usually at that time. Myrtle was brilliant. She was well-read and well-educated, especially for woman of her day when girls were primarily taught how to be good housewives. At the age of 21, she enrolled in the literary course for ladies at Oberlin College. This was the first co-educational college in the US, where she received a teaching certificate. For she believed that women could take responsibility for their lives and choose their thoughts and choose their actions. So Myrtle taught for a time, probably in a one-room schoolhouse, and she loved teaching, but her health began to decline. So she moved. That was kind of what they did then. The prescription was to move where the weather was better. She moved and lived for a year in Denison, Texas, hoping that the better climate would help her. And in that year, she started her own progressive school for children. And she then moved back to Ohio. But for that year that she was in Texas, she met a much younger man from the Minnesota Territory named Charles Fillmore. Now, they couldn't have been more different. Myrtle was from this quaint little town in the Midwest, and the Minnesota Territory was wild and untamed. Charles and his family had lived for a time at the edge of an Indian reservation, and his dad traded with the local tribe. Charles's education came through experience and by what he learned from a friend's mother who for a time taught her son and Charles at her home. So after Myrtle went back to Ohio, Charles courted her by letter for 3 years before he journeyed to Ohio to marry her in 1881. And then they traveled by rail and stagecoach and finally by sled to make it to Pueblo, Colorado, where they settled. Now, 2 of their 3 sons were born there, Lowell Page Fillmore and Waldo Rickert Fillmore, known as Rick. And he was named after Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose transcendental writings were a major influence on the Fillmores. So this little family eventually settled in Kansas City, where Charles built a successful real estate business. Now, Charles had always been a dabbler. He would try one line of work and then another, and sometimes it succeeded and sometimes not. A 3rd son, John Royal, was born after Myrtle's healing, and the same year Unity was founded in 1889. So Myrtle had suffered all her life from multiple unexplained illnesses that the doctors at the time labeled tuberculosis. They said that she had inherited it. And at the age of 40, she was given 6 months to live. She was truly sick, and she and Charles were absolutely desperate, looking for help wherever it might be found. And that is how they found themselves at a lecture in 1886 by a metaphysician, Eugene B. Weeks. Now, Eugene B. Weeks was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins. And within this lecture, Myrtle lay hold of a single idea. I am a child of God. Therefore, I do not inherit sickness. I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. Now, this was contrary to what she had been told her entire life, and it changed everything. Spending hours every day in prayer and meditation, she spoke to her body, each center of her body, apologizing for ever thinking that it was ill and envisioning it vibrant and healthy. So when people asked Myrtle how she healed her body, she said she did it by changing her thinking. She started thinking of her body not as inheriting illness, but as being perfect and whole. And she wrote, I have been laboring under the belief in inherited ill health, and the truth of my divine parentage freed and healed me. Each day, she shut herself in a room with an empty chair, and she envisioned that in that chair was Jesus. She read the Bible, she prayed, She meditated, and she talked to her body. She said, life is simply a form of energy and has to be guided and directed in by man's intelligence. And that's just how humankind was referred to then, as man. It's just the language of the day. She believed that our bodies are absolutely the fruits of our minds, that what we're holding in our mind outpictures in our bodies. So what she learned about the power of prayer and the power of thought, these are the fundamental teachings of unity. Myrtle's physical healing by spiritual means sparked the creation of unity in everything that it became. Now, more than a decade later, she wrote a detailed description of her healing process called How I Found Health. And you have a copy in today's spotlight, or you can find it at truthunity.net. Simply put in the search bar, How I Found Health. And for the remaining 40 years, Myrtle taught that our belief in aging and illness blocks the flow of spirit, that health is our natural state of being, that our bodies are vehicles for our souls on earth. So how could they be anything less than perfect? And Myrtle believed without question that our health, our outer health, reflects our consciousness. She believed that there was no such thing as a disease or incurable condition, that anything that does not measure up to the Christ pattern of perfection can be changed through effort and through changing our thoughts. Now, Charles took notice of his wife's healing, and she assured him that he too could be healed. Charles had suffered a hip injury when he was a child in a skating accident, and one leg was 4 inches shorter than the other. He walked with crutches from the time he was a child. He decided he would go to headquarters. That's what he called it when he would go to pray and meditate, and he would try it himself. Using the power of prayer and thought, he said that his leg grew longer. And as an older man, he only needed a built-up shoe and a cane to get around. No more crutches. Myrtle began to help friends and neighbors heal themselves by impressing upon them this new way of thinking. She established the Unity Prayer Ministry in 1890 as the Society for Silent Help. And it became what we know today as Silent Unity, which now responds to over 1 million requests for prayer every year. They published a magazine, Modern Thought, later named Unity Magazine. They wanted to share what they were learning about spiritual principles. And through the also offered prayer support to people outside the Kansas City area. And they were flooded with letters asking for help with healing and just life in general. In those early months, Myrtle had a vision of her own. A voice within her asked, who will take care of the children? Remember, she was a teacher at heart. The answer, too, came from within, and it was, you are to take care of the children. This is your work. In 1893, she started a magazine called We Wisdom, which enthralled children over a period of 98 years. At one time, it was the longest running children's magazine in the US. Now, Myrtle was the editor for the first 29 years, and she used this magazine to teach new thought principles to kids through stories and games and puzzles, poems, and artwork. She said, the mission of We Wisdom is not to entertain the children, but to call them out. To be always entertained is to be dwarfed and dependent. To be called out is to follow the harmonious law of the soul's unfoldment. Her 3 boys were drafted as pint-sized assistants, and they consulted her in stories telling her what they thought boys would say and do. And eventually they contributed their own essays and artwork. Myrtle passionately wanted to affirm children's innate belief in a friendly universe and assure them that they were loved by God and created in God's perfect image. Imagine how impactful that was to a child, perhaps with a disability or an illness, to hear that they were absolutely perfect. Myrtle believed that prayer was as important for children as everyone else, and she found a poem by Hannah More Kochas called The Prayer of Faith. It first appeared in We Wisdom in 1898 and became the most popular item Unity ever published. You have a copy in your spotlight, and we have an audio recording of Myrtle Fillmore reciting this poem, sounding like everyone's favorite old aunt, that we can listen to now.
God is my help in every need. God does my every hunger feed. God walks beside me, guides my way through every moment of the day. I now am wise, I now am true, patient, kind, and loving too. All things I am, can do, and be through Christ the truth that is in me. God is my health, I can't be sick. God is my strength unfailing quick. God is my all, I know no fear, since God and love and truth are here. Amen.
Thank you. Charles and Myrtle became vegetarians in 1895 and eventually established a vegetarian restaurant. It was the first one in Kansas City. They featured fruits and vegetables grown at Unity Farm, which is what we now know as Unity Village. They embraced living full and healthy spiritual lives holistically. All of Myrtle's sons married. The youngest son, Royal, his wife died shortly after giving childbirth. And Royal followed 2 years later. He was a diabetic with high blood pressure. He was only 34. And their toddler daughter, Frances, went to live with her Uncle Lowell and his wife, growing up at Unity Farm. It's important for us to remember that Myrtle and Charles did not live trouble-free lives. Hearing Myrtle's voice in that recording sounds so lighthearted, doesn't it? But remember that Myrtle was told, even as a child, she was frail and ill, and that women in her family did not live long. She fell in love with a much younger man, Charles, and then moved away from him. After they married, they made a tremendously rough journey to Colorado. Together, they had businesses fail. Their story was not one of consistent success and abundance. Can you imagine losing first your daughter-in-law and then their youngest son? It was tragic. It was heartbreaking. And they held a faith. Myrtle died in 1931 at the age of 86, not because there was anything wrong with her body, but because she had decided that she had finished her work on earth. This is a story that was known initially for years, and then it disappeared from Unity's history for a time, as if Myrtle making that decision was somehow wrong. I'm glad to see that it's back in the light. This is an account from a writer from Unity Farm. They had a weekly little periodical that went out to all of the employees. And this is what this writer shared about Myrtle's last days. Not long before her passing, she climbed 4 flights of stairs to reach the writer's office, where she made a sunny, smiling visit. As always, she was in the best of spirits, a characteristic that made her visits to various departments of the school a delight and a benediction. During her visit, she remarked that she wanted to make a change. "That's fine," the writer answered. "What kind of change?" I believe that it would be easier for me to do the work that is ahead of me from the invisible plane. Oh, you mustn't do that. We need your help, your inspiration, your spiritual guidance here, he answered. You know that you will always have that anyhow, she smiled. As was her custom, she helped Charles with a class that week. Then that weekend, she went to the lovely country home, the Arches at Unity Farm, to spend the weekend with her family, where she quietly and peacefully lay down to rest and serenely slipped into the realm that lies just beyond the senses. Charles lived another 17 years, active until he died just before his 94th birthday. Years later, their granddaughter, Unity minister Rosemary Fillmore Rhea, who was Rick's daughter, summed up the lives of Myrtle and Charles, their healings and their teachings. She said, they had an absolute faith that with God, all things are possible. Two sick, poverty-ridden people found a faith, made the quantum leap from darkness and despair into the light of all possibilities. Into the light of all possibilities. Yes, they did this, and then they were committed to helping others do the same. Healing, specifically Myrtle's healing, was the foundation of what we now know as unity. The full and complete healing that she experienced prompted her to dedicate her life to spreading the word, helping others to experience what she had, an ancient truth manifested in her life, believing that all things are possible for those who seek and transform their way of thinking, affirming thoughts have power to shape our lives. Thoughts have power to shape our manifest world. May Myrtle remain an inspiration, an example, a great teacher of these universal truths. Let us learn from her life and continue to experience our own personal healings. And so it is. And so it is.